All right, we're going to get started here. Well, congratulations. You've survived 3 days of the conference so far. I know it's been, for some of you, maybe even more than 3 days. I know it's been a bit of a drinking from a fire hose, but hopefully it's been worthwhile for all of you. My name is Scott Rubel. I am a PM manager on the Excel team, and I've got some exciting things to show you today about the new visualizations within Office. Now, some of this has already been foreshadowed in some of the prior presentations, but we're going to do a deep dive into these visualizations today, give you a full tour of what they're about, how to use them, why to use them, and things of that nature. So in terms of the content we're going to cover in this presentation, I'll first set the context of how these new visualizations fit into our overall BI stack and our analytic tools. Then I'll talk a little bit about the journey that we've been on for the last decade and give you a feel for some of the past releases we've had with some of the visualization capabilities. The nuts and bolts of this presentation will be the deep dive demo of Office 2016, where we'll go through each one of the visualizations and show you some examples of those. That's where we'll spend the majority of this presentation. And then I'll wrap things up with a little bit of a roadmap for where we're heading with visualizations in Office. Okay, so in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, I know some presenters like to have people hold their questions to the very end so they don't get interrupted and things like that. Well, I have kids. I get interrupted all the time. So feel free to ask at any time. If you have a question, step up to the mic or just shout it out and ask away. And if you feel a sudden urge to applaud, that's not going to bother me at all either. So feel free to do that. If it feels good, go for it. Okay? All right, so with that, let me give you a little bit of the context of how visualizations within Office fit into the broader BI stack and our analytic tools. Microsoft, as well as all the rest of the companies at this conference, are dealing with an ever-increasing amount of data in the volume, velocity, and variety of types of data that we need to make sense of every day. Microsoft provides a portfolio of different tools and services that help you gather, govern, analyze, and report on that data to make better sense out of it, to make better operational decisions, to improve your efficiency of the organization, and just find greater insights. Now, we target these tools at three distinct audiences, the first of which is IT pros and development tools, then we have our business analysts, and then the ever-present data consumers. For the IT pros and developers, we have a variety of SQL tools that allow you to do governance and deep analytics on your company's big data. For business analytics, we have two client-side apps. One is Excel, and I think most of you should be familiar with Excel, and the other is Power BI Designer. Now, Excel is the premier analytic tool, and that will be the focus of this presentation. But Power BI Designer is kind of the new kid on the block. It is largely used for developing very rich, exploratory, interactive visualizations in the forms of dashboards and things of that nature. And then for the 70% of the rest of the organization, the data consumers, we provide Power BI, which is a BI analytics service that allows you to deploy your critical business information out to the rest of your organization in the form of dashboards, KPIs, and interactive reports. So that's kind of the big picture of how things all fit together. When we've looked at the user journey in terms of how people use our products, we've found a distinct path that they go. It's not exactly a linear path. There's loopbacks and things of that nature. Typically, people get their data, they clean it up into a form that they can actually work with, then they analyze it to try to find insights, after which they tend to visualize the data so they can find more insights and then more effectively communicate that information to a broader audience. They publish it out, ultimately to the consumers who then interact with the information in a variety of forms. This presentation will be about that middle segment, the visualization piece of things. And we'll touch on a few of the other aspects of it as well. All right, so we've been working on visualizations in Office for quite some time. It's part of our heritage. And I want to walk you through some of the past releases that we've had and some of the functionality of that. Before I do that, though, I just want to get a sense from the audience. How many of you are currently on Office 2007 or earlier? Anybody? All right, with one person or a couple of people. About Office 2010? A little bit more. How about Office 2013? Okay, glad to see that. And how many of you are on the Office 2016 technical preview? Okay, one couple of you here. I've got a link at the back of my deck that will take you to how you can sign up for the technical preview. What I'm going to be showing you during the demo portion is not currently in the technical preview bits. We've been releasing the previews every month, so the stuff I'll be showing you will be coming out at the end of May, so you'll have it shortly thereafter. So think of it as like a good motivation to get on the technical preview, all right? So let's talk about Office 2007. This goes back a ways. A lot of you should be familiar with this since you're already on later versions. I just want to set the stage for the journey that we've been on over the last decade. If you recall, this was a pretty major release for us. It was the first time we gave all of the UI a major facelift with putting in the ribbon, getting rid of the drop-down menus and things of that nature to provide more of a graphical feel for how you access the functionality and spread things out in that manner. This is the first time we also unified the user experience across all of our different core Office apps, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, so they all behaved the same, had the similar functionality, similar look and feel. And with that, we tied them into document themes. So now you could actually have an overall document theme that made your information look very professional, and you could push that out to the rest of the organization. And with that, we enabled chart styles and layouts, which gave you very quick ways of professionally formatting your visualizations. We also tied in the Office effects and formatting to give you a richer look and feel over various line widths and shadows and transparency and things of that nature. The last item was we gave you the ability to push your charts to the web through Excel services. So this was a pretty major release for us. It took us a while to get out the door, but it happened. The next release was around Office 2010. And with that, because the prior release was such a major one, we had to spend a little bit more time on working on some of the performance and stability. So we invested in that. We added a few new features like sparklines and icon sets. These are sparklines are the tiny little charts that sit within a cell. And the icon sets, so there are some minor improvements of those with some of the different visual effects that you could have on those. Then we come to 2013, where again, this was a fairly large release for us again. It was the first time we had introduced chart recommendations, which was a way to select a set of data and get some recommendations out of it based on industry best practices and heuristics. So we're trying to take some of the uncertainty around what is the right visualization to use. Should it be a column chart, a line chart, or a pie chart? And use some of the heuristics and best practices to help enable people and move them forward in an effective manner. We also surfaced combo charts in a more effective way. Combo charts have always been supported within our Office products, but they weren't very easily created or modified. We also introduced the notion of live previews, so you could very quickly see what you're going to get before you put it down on the chart. We'd seen a lot of times cases where customers would create a visualization, have to delete it, and start over again because it was more of a trial and error process. But with now our live preview galleries, you can see just before you commit to something what you're going to get, and you're more likely to get what you like. Proximal UI was another thing we introduced in the 2013 timeframe. Those are the little widgets that show up on the right-hand side of the chart. You can see in my screenshot here, we've got a plus, a little paintbrush, and a funnel icon. The proximal UI just improves the discoverability of various very common operations like adding or removing chart elements or the pieces of the chart, setting a filter, or setting a style on the chart. We've gotten some great feedback from customers on that. And then task panes was the last one where we tried to unify all of our secondary UI, which are typically in dialogues, and move them over to the task pane. So whenever you're trying to set properties or formatting and things of that nature, that's all aligned in the task pane now. So again, another major release for us, but there's a lot more coming. And that's Office 2016, and that will be the thrust of this presentation. So with this release, we're coming out with a whole series of new chart types that have been the need of customers for quite some time. We've got tree maps, sunburst, histogram, Pareto, box and whisker, and waterfall. And I'll walk you through examples of each one of these. In addition to that, we also have some geospatial capabilities in the way of Power Map, and then we're also moving each of these to the various different mobile endpoints, such as the universal apps that run on the tablet devices, and Android and iOS. So with that, let me move over to my demo here. All right, so we're going to take a look at a fictitious company. This is not Contoso. We're tired of Contoso, so we came up with our own data set. You can imagine for a moment that you're the owner of a small bookstore, okay? And there's a lot of different dimensions that people need to look at with respect to running their bookstore. This scenario can be scaled as large or as small as you want to make it. It doesn't have to be about books. It could be about light bulbs or tires or anything of that nature. Books are just a convenient way of kind of painting the story of how you can use these visualization types in a wide variety of different use cases. All right, so we here have on our first tab a profit and loss statement for 2014. It's a very common layout that you'll see. It's also known as an income statement. So the first thing you might want to be able to do is explain, the nature of your business, of how it's profitable to a variety of other people. So I simply can select my data set here, go up to the Insert tab, and come across to my recommended charts. So as I was mentioning before with recommended charts, we run a series of heuristics on the data set to determine what are the best chart types available for that particular data set. And you'll notice now we have waterfall as one of the new chart types. So let's go ahead and select that guy and drops him into my page. Go ahead and resize it a little bit here so you can see a little bit easier. What the waterfall chart does is basically gives you a staircase pattern of the gains or losses within your company. This does not need to be used for just financial information, though it's one of the more common chart types that are used in the financial community. For any type of situation where there's gains or losses, you can use this kind of visualization. A lot of times, though, people like to show the subtotals as they make the progression across the path. So, for example, the net revenue, if I wanted to turn that into a subtotal, simply right-click on it, set as total, and then it starts the base at 0 and goes up to the top. So what you're seeing here is basically, here's the starting point. We had a loss of $2,412, which then results in the $243,219 as that subtotal. So let's go ahead and set the subtotals for the other sections here. Set that one, and we'll set this guy, set as total, and this one, set as total. All right, so there's a quick waterfall chart with only a few mouse clicks. Now, as I was saying, that this is built in. It's a native feature within Excel, so I can start to use other capabilities that we've had for a long time, such as styling. So if I like a kind of a dark theme to it, I can have that show up in my document. If I want to use this in Word and PowerPoint, I can simply copy and paste into PowerPoint. This is fully functional. As you can see, it already snaps to the default theme of this document, but I can go ahead and change that theme to whatever else I want, and the visualization results in the according manner. So you can see that's a nice flow across the different the charts in that manner. Okay, so that's a waterfall chart, but we have a lot more than just that. Let's move on to our market comparison. Let's imagine for a moment that you're able to buy some data from a third party that shows the various book sales across other companies in the country. So as an example, within each state, there's a particular book company and the number of units that they sold. And the idea here is you want to see how you compare relative to the competition. Are you a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in a small pond? So with this type of visualization, again, I can just simply select it, go to Insert, Recommended Charts, and here I now have a histogram. And I'll explain the nature of a histogram here in a second. We'll resize a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. A histogram is basically a frequency distribution. It shows you the count of a particular bin set of things. And here, so the value axis are the number of book sellers, so in this case, and then the x-axis are the number of units sold. And so we typically apply a default binning to each one of these to show the overall magnitude. So in this first bin, we go from 49 units to 1,649, and we have 80 companies that are selling in that particular range. Now with histograms, a lot of times what you'll want to do is play around with the actual binning. We use industry standard binning algorithms called Scott's algorithm to generate this, but a lot of times it'll put you in the right ballpark, but it's not necessarily going to be exact. There could be kind of some funny edges. So like the upper bound of this edge may not be exactly what I want. So I can just pop open the properties on this guy, and I can change the bin width to something a little bit more uniform, like let's say 1,000. Hit that, and it reshapes the values accordingly to see that. Now, what you also may want to do in this particular case is play around with different binnings, because you can expose various insights from this. So let's go ahead and select this guy again. Change the binning to, let's say, 500. And what you'll see is all of a sudden there's a spike between the 549 and the 1,049, because previously it was part of a larger group, so it was masked in that way. But you can see that there was a spike in that regard. So a lot of times you'll see histograms used in normal curves and things of that nature. This one doesn't look very much like a standard distribution, but there's a bit of a bias towards the tail end. I know from other analysis that I did on this data that my company is in around the 7,000 units per of sales, so I fit right in this particular area here, which is doing relatively well. So let me show you another chart type that we support that's related to the histogram, which is the Pareto chart. So Pareto charts are essentially based on the Pareto principle, which is also known as 80-20 rule. So it's effectively 80% of the effects are caused by 20% of the causes. And the idea being that you should focus your energy on the things that matter most, that 20%. So here's an example data set where I've determined various book returns, why they returned. Things such as it was defective, it was the wrong product, wrong pricing, things of that nature. So again, this could be applied to a wide variety of scenarios. Again, I'll just go ahead and select my data. Move back up to the top here. I'll go to Insert, Recommended Charts, and we have a Pareto chart. And let me go ahead and explain the mechanics behind this. So it's very similar to a histogram in that there's binning going on, but it's based on a particular category. So as you can see, there's defects, increased or incorrect pricing, wrong product, cost too much, so on and so forth. The value axis is the count, the number of things actually falling into that. And then the right axis here is the percentage contribution. So if you add up all these bins, it's the percent that this maps to. And so we overlay a line, which is called the Pareto line. The idea here is to scan across from the 80% mark to see where that intersects the line. And you can see then that those are the things that are the major contributors to your overall problems for book returns. So again, the intent here would be to focus on those handful of things that matter most to your business and correct those. The rest will take care of itself. Now, in the past, I've done a lot of presentations on tips and tricks and things of that nature. A lot of the charts that I've been showing you in the past would have taken 20 steps or so to actually create. Now we're trying to simplify all of that so that there are no more tips and tricks. It's simply click the button and it works. All right, let's move on to another example here. This one we're going to work on is a tree map. So let's go ahead and select our data set one more time. And I've been showing you examples of going through chart recommendations, but we also allow you to insert it directly onto your page in the event that you actually know exactly what you want. So we've got some new icons showing up here in the preview build. So let's go ahead and click on Tree Map. And again, I'll resize this up a little bit. Oh, a little bit too large. And what I'm going to do is change the styling so that I have some header labels so I can more easily see the breakdown of things. So a tree map is basically a hierarchical representation of our data set. You can see the top band here, children's books, is the parent node, and then it shows all the leaf nodes within that. From this particular data set, you can see that the children's books is the largest contributor in terms of the finances. These are the revenue for this particular data set that is contributing to my business. Then we also have romance, it's another big one, as well as mystery. This is another major contributor to the financial overall well-being of my business. So this is a pretty effective type of visualization to use to convey the hierarchical breakdown and the contribution of the various pieces that make up that segment of your business. There's another chart type, though, that you might want to use in this particular case, which is called a sunburst. And the sunburst allows you to see more of the full hierarchy of the visualization. And you'll notice that we organically change the chart type, so it's much more smooth as we switch between different visualizations, as well as when I change values on these. So here we have a sunburst. It shows at the top levels like the children's books. If I select that and then I select the others, we're using series dimming as a way of just highlighting the particular things that I've selected. Then I can click down into the lower one as well. So we're trying to improve the look and feel as well as the interaction model with our various chart types. All right, so that's the sunburst. Let's move on to box and whisker. Now, box and whisker requires a little bit more explanation. It's one of the more statistically heavy visualizations that we're releasing, but it's actually a very useful one for understanding the distribution of values. So the data we're looking at here is, you can imagine, as a bookstore owner, you want to understand the distribution of the prices of your books. And there were 3 key categories that we looked at previously, that being children's books, romance, and mystery. So the idea is you want to understand what is the distribution of the prices of those books, because depending upon your goals, you may actually want to have a fairly tight distribution for a targeted audience. So what I've done is pulled in this data, so you can see here's the book ID, the category that fell into, the price, and the particular date that that price was effective on. And this covers all the different 3 categories that we were interested in looking at previously. Okay, so let's take a look at the box and whisker chart. This one's a little bit more involved. Let me explain some of the components. The X in the center here, that is the mean. The mean, however, can be a little bit misleading depending upon the distribution of your data, because it can be very biased by outliers as well as clustering of your data points. Let me turn on some of the inner values, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll bring up the properties here. We'll click on Show Inner Points, and you can actually see now the distribution of the data points across that entire range. As you can see, for the children's books, it's a fairly tight distribution, starting in the, around the $4, $3 range, going up to, let's see, $50 or so, $48. So that's probably a good idea for the children's books. Very tight range, very targeted for that particular audience. If you look at the romance side of things, it's got a much wider distribution of things, and you can see that the mean actually is largely affected by these other values that are higher on the end, whereas there's a large clustering of ones down here. So you might want to check into, it's like, why is there such a spread of those? And then we also have one outlier here. So in terms of how to interpret a box and whisker, you have the outlier bands here and here, and that is a proportion based on the first quartile and the third quartile. The first quartile is essentially the 25th percentile, which means there's 25% of all the values up to that point. Then we have the median, which is the 50th percentile, meaning all the values, there's 50% of all the values up to that point. Then we have the third quartile. So it gives you a real quick way of looking at the distribution of your data to see anomalies that you may have in that data set and how things could be influencing the various statistical parameters. Then the outlier here is anything that falls outside of this particular range, the outer whisker. Okay. Let's move on to monthly revenue here. What I have are sales for the 3 particular categories that I wanted to look at, children, mystery, and romance books. I want to understand the trend of my sales over time. But I want to take it one step further, not just see the current trend of values. I want to see what the forecasted trend is. So we now give you the ability to look at forecasts. So let's go ahead and select my Data tab, click on Forecast Sheet. That automatically generates a visualization. It looks like that's a quick live preview here, but I'll show you what that looks like in more detail in a second, and a variety of different options, the starting point, ending point, and various other parameters that you can adjust here. Let's go ahead and click Create. And I can resize this guy to more effectively fit into the page. You can see the blue area is the actual data, and you can see some periodicity in this, or seasonality. So during the holiday seasons around November to December, you see there's a spike in sales, and that's true of each one of these last 3 years of data. But you can see also a general trend upward in this information. When we get to the red section, that is the forecasted region. The dark red is the primary line, and then the lighter bands, the upper and lower bounds, give you the kind of the confidence interval as you proceed along in the forecasted future. So from this, you can get a better feel for what the confidence level is for a particular date and time out into the future. So you can use that for inventory control, pre-orders, things of that nature. All right, so it's kind of a whirlwind tour of the new visualizations that we have baked into Excel, Word, and PowerPoint coming out in the Office 2016 preview. Again, you can get the preview. At the end of the month, we'll be having these bits available to you for these particular charts. So I encourage you to do that. I'd like to shift gears now and talk a little bit about geospatial visualizations. We have a tool that is called PowerMap that we previously released a few months back for Office 2013. It was an add-in that you could download and work with. So PowerMap is a geospatial visualization tool that supports both 2D and 3D visualizations and allows you to do temporal analysis and rich storytelling. It's based on some technology that we got from MSR. In fact, if you attended the end-of-day keynote on Monday, Curtis Wong talked about the Worldwide Telescope and some of the inspirations behind that. We actually worked with his team to take his technology and make it more for business applications. So we didn't focus on the universe, we focused on the Earth and applied business analytics and various other techniques to introduce those pieces of functionality. So I'd like to walk you through PowerMap fairly quickly, and then also we've been releasing new functionality on a fairly regular basis. There are a couple new features that I'll highlight here that will also be coming out in the next month or so as part of the technical preview. Okay, so the data set that I'm looking at here are queries on the web. So you imagine like in a bookstore, a lot of times when you walk into the store, they have this display at the front that has various books that are featured for that particular day or week or month. It'd be nice to actually know what's trending, what are people really interested in, so that I can have that display really illustrate the things that people are of greatest interest. So what I have here is the data set of queries that people are doing on the web for particular locations across the country. So let's go ahead and fire up PowerMap with that. Go to the Insert tab, click on Map, open up PowerMap. I've already got a tour generated, but I'll create a new one just to show you some of the basics behind this. So this is an add-in. You'll notice some differences in the UI and things of that nature. I'll be talking about the roadmap here towards the end, but the intent is a lot of these add-ins we're going to start moving in as native functionality. So see this UI be married in with the other types of charts that we have. So when I first opened up PowerMap, it takes the data, it automatically detects the columns of data that are location-based. It sends that up to Bing for geocoding and returns the lat-long value. So I don't have to worry about any type of lat-long encoding or things of that nature. It just does it for me automatically. As you can see, it automatically checked city and state as those geocoded values and already started plotting those on the globe. PowerMap is also designed for very large data sets. We are looking at about 107,000 data points on the globe right now, and it plots it very quickly because it's using the GPU for doing those renderings. So one of the key things with PowerMap, as I mentioned earlier, is the storytelling aspect of it. So as I start to play with my data, I can take snapshots of the insights that I find along the journey and then play those back as a movie, as an example. So this is the first scene in that movie that I've created. And to create another scene, I just simply click New Scene. Think of it as a slide in PowerPoint, but much more interactive and fluid in terms of its interactivity. All right, so I've created a new scene here. Now I can start to play around with some of the other dimensions of data that I have in my data set. So I've got things like the query view count, which is basically allowing me to add up the number of queries in a particular city that was searching on books. And so the type of books that we're looking at here is over the last 20 days of queries. And you can see right away that there's some spikes starting to occur in different parts of the country. We have some spikes over here. This is my home turf, Seattle, and then not too surprisingly, we have New York, we've got Portland, Oregon, and places like that. This is just one of several different views we give at your disposal within PowerMap. We have several different ones, such as you can show it as bubbles, you can show it as a heat map, and you can also show it as regions. There's a slight bug that I'm going to work around here real quickly, so I'm just going to add another scene to avoid this problem. Because when I click on the regions, something gets messed up. But I'll just show you the regions. It basically allows you to show the data with respect to a particular region in the country, be it a state, a county. You can also upload your own custom regions. So if you have a shape file or a KML file, you can upload that and define your particular own region, such as a sales territory, as an example. I'm going to get rid of this guy for a second and go back to my heat map here. So this is, I'm starting to kind of build up an awareness of what's going on. Let me create one more scene here. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to change the duration on these because you'll see these play back in time in a moment. All right, new scene, and I'll drag this guy down below. All right, so go back to my layers. And now what I'd like to do is start illustrating some of the specific aspects, maybe some of the key insights that I found in my data set. So I'm going to go back and turn on my query count. And you'll notice that generates the 3D view. And I'm going to rotate the globe so I can see things in more of a three-dimensional space. And zoom in on the West Coast so I can see what's happening in Seattle. Actually, rotate it this way. And to make things a little bit more obvious, I can label things, add annotation, so that when I refer back to this, I know what it's about. And as you see, that label tracks with that particular data point no matter where I'm at in the scene. Go ahead and create a new scene here. And one of the key things is I like to understand the categories of my books. So this basically color codes the particular book types that people are doing queries on. All right, so you can see if I zoom in a little bit more what those queries look like. And I'll create one more scene just to illustrate some of the temporal aspects of the analysis that we can do. So with this one, what I'd like to do is turn on the query date, and this will illustrate the queries that were generated in a particular day and time. I'll set this to short instance, and so I can play this back over time, and I can start to see how the data was surfaced. All right, let me rewind this. You can see how the data changes over time. I'll get rid of this guy because it's a little hard to see. I can then play that back and see particular patterns that emerge. And as you look at this, there's some interesting things that do start to pop out. So for example, romance books, for whatever reason, tend to be more of interest on Mondays and Thursdays as opposed to any other week. So if you're trying to optimize your little display in your particular area, you might want to put the romance books out in front to encourage people to buy those. So I've just kind of given you a real quick tour of what's going on with PowerMap here. With a little bit more time and a little bit more effort, I could really make this into a polished presentation that I could communicate to a wider audience. You could save this, send the file out to the other people in your organization, and they could open this up and play it back just like I was playing for you. Or you could generate a video, which then could be posted on the web or however you want. It's more self-contained, and that's done simply by clicking Create Video. So I've already done that. Yes?
Will that video allow you to fly over and capture a scene that you've pre-selected?
Yeah, so the question was, will the video allow you to fly over and capture the scene that you created? We have a number of preset cameras in the tool, so you can circle around a particular data point or zoom in on it or hover over it. You'd set those up in the designer here, and then when you create the video, it just basically plays that back into video form, so it captures everything that you did in the process of constructing the video. Okay? Another question. The question is, can you export it into PowerPoint? You can export the video into PowerPoint. It already supports video, so that would be the primary delivery vehicle in that way. So let me shift over to showing you the video. I actually did spend a little bit more time dressing this up to explain, what are the details behind the analysis that I did. So let me go ahead and fire that up. Now, you can put a soundtrack on this. You can have a narrator, kind of like what I'm doing, so if there's not somebody around to explain what's happening. We started out with a global view, then we flattened the map and showed the number of queries taking place over time. So this is an aggregated view of the number of queries. That's why you see the spikes starting to grow from the ground up. These are the searches conducted on Bing during the month of April, which is effectively 20 days of information. And again, this is 107,000 data points. Here we're pivoting around, looking at Seattle to kind of get a closer view on that. We can also overlay 2D bar charts on this, because with 3D you have a parallax effect and you can't really compare heights very well. So we give you the ability to look at that in a 2D form, which is a little bit more easy to see the relative heights. So New York is the highest, but Seattle is actually the 5th highest in terms of book queries in this particular segment of time. So here I switch over to looking at the West Coast and the breakdown of the different book categories. You can see, the percentage of art books and baby books and things of that nature. What's really interesting is that purple band off on the right here, which are the romance novels. You can see that's actually in Beaverton, Oregon. I'm not quite sure why they're so interested in romance books, but that just happens to be a particular trend that we're seeing with this data set. Here we're flying across the country to take a look at what's going on the East Coast, just for comparison purposes. So you can see in New York, you have a similar pattern of types of books relative to that in Seattle, in terms of art books, children's books, finance, and history. So not too big of a difference there, but the romance one was kind of interesting for the Beaverton area. Seattle also had a fair percentage of romance books as well. Maybe that's something to do with Sleepers in Seattle. I'm not quite sure, but you never know. Here we're looking at a region-based map, so we're color-coding things based on those three categories once again, just to get a better sense as to where the highest concentration is. And then once again, we're looking at a time series, time lapse of the queries, so I can see if there's any temporal patterns in my information. Each day of the week, we're looking at these. And then here in a moment, we're going to switch over to every hour of the day to see any particular patterns in that behavior. And so you can see things are starting to pop around, kind of like popcorn, but you see this little purple spike kind of popping up every so often. It happens in a fairly predictable manner. It's like around 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's a wave of these purple bars that cascade across the country. So our thinking is that maybe it's something to do with like TV, and maybe there's an Oprah show or Dr. Phil show on or something like that that's encouraging people to increase their romance or something to that effect. So lots of interesting views you can generate with PowerMap in that regard. Let me go ahead and pause that. All right. I'm going to switch back to my slide deck now. Any quick questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so what we just saw there, is all of that in the current 2013 add-in, or is some of that in the 2016 version?
The question is, how much of the stuff I just showed was in the 2013 add-in versus what's in the 2016 technical preview? There's about 95% of the stuff in the add-in. We basically backport the stuff that we're shipping as part of the boxed product to the add-in. So eventually they'll be one-to-one, but right now there's a slight difference just because we're trying to get 2016 out the door and put to bed. Some of the newer features like the regions, some data cards, things like that, those aren't in the add-in just yet. Okay? Another question. Will you be able to plot lanes, is the question? Okay, so yeah, that is a common ask we get. We call them paths. That is something that's high on our list. It's not going to be in this release, but it's right up there with the future plans that we'd like to do with geospatial. Sure. How many scenes? That was about 8 scenes. So each scene is fairly involved in terms of camera panning and zooming and stuff of that nature. But it didn't take a whole lot. And once you get familiar with some of the, how to lay things out and stuff, it's actually quite quick. Sure.
I have a question with regard to your tree map.
Yes, tree maps.
I saw that when you were hovering over, it was showing the values.
Mm-hmm.
So if you publish it in the SharePoint, and if you open using these services, so does it still show you the values when we hover over, or it doesn't?
So yeah, the question is, will the tree map, and I assume this applies to the other chart types as well, will it show you, have the interactivity like tooltips and things of that nature when you publish this to a SharePoint? Specifically, Excel Services would be the vehicle that we'd publish it to. We have a series of different endpoints now with our various products. We have the desktop, we have the web, we have the mobile devices, Android, iOS, universal apps. Not all of them will have all the same functioning at the same time. We have a number of things that we're going to try to get out the door as quickly as we can. The first is the desktop, as well as the universal app, the tablet. And then very shortly after that, we're going to be releasing other functionality. So day one, this will not be available on the web right away, okay? Your file will be fine up there. It will round trip and all that, but you will not see the new visualizations day one when we release this. We will be providing the web version very shortly after that, and when we have the web version ready, it will support tooltips and other types of functionality that you have today with legacy visualizations. Okay?
Are you saying these charts cannot be even visualized using the Excel services then?
Not on day one. It will come out very shortly after that. Because it's a web-based product, we can push that out very quickly to the rest of the organization. Sure. Will visualizations work on top of pivot tables? So in essence, a pivot chart, is that the question? So in a similar vein, pivot charts will not be part of the first release. They will come very shortly after, and we'll be pushing that out as part of like O365 and other delivery vehicles. Sure.
Today, the scatter chart is not working on top of pivot tables.
That's
Fixed as well?
yeah. So the comment was pivot scatter charts do not work with pivot tables today either. That is true, and that is something that we are working on and will be part of a future refresh. One of the things I wanted to point out is the new visualizations that I showed, the box and whisker, tree map, sunburst, those are actually being generated off of a new charting engine that we've been working on for many months. All of our legacy charts are on a different legacy engine. We will be migrating all of our legacy charts forward to this new engine over the coming year. And at that time, we'll start to fill in some of these gaps, like was just commented on with respect to like scatter charts in pivot chart form. Okay? Other questions? All right, let's move on to some other slides here. So I'd like to talk a little bit about future of Office visualizations. Now, there's a lot of industry trends going on. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. They're things that we take to heart as well. One of the first ones is just the general democratization of data viz. Many years ago, you need specialized tools, specialized equipment, things of that nature to generate visualizations, but they're becoming fairly commonplace, and we want to continue to make them as easy to use as possible. As I mentioned earlier in this segment, I used to do these tips and tricks presentations where it's 20, 30 steps to generate a waterfall chart, as an example. Now it's 2 clicks. We want to continue down that path so everybody in your organization has the ability, regardless of the level of training, to create these types of visuals. There's a series of new interaction modes that we're starting to emerge in the industry. Touch is a very obvious one. So how does touch work well with visualizations? We're exploring a bunch of patterns along those lines. But new things are coming out, like air gestures and large surface displays, and you know, we've got the HoloLens. And so there's all kinds of really interesting, rich experiences that we're exploring and seeing how we can achieve the greatest value out of those. As I'm sure many of you have seen, there's also many devices, platforms, and form factors, and we're starting to follow suit with that by providing these out to our various endpoints. It can't all happen overnight. It'll be a bit of a staged process, but we're very aware of that, and we're trying to fill in those gaps. Services is another thing that's starting to emerge. We're going to the web or going to the cloud and being able to generate through REST API various visualizations is another very interesting scenario to us that we've got some plans around that as well. Analysis and exploration. This is a key area for visualizations. A lot of times doing analytics was relegated to just looking at numbers and pivot tables and things of that nature. But people are starting to realize the real power of visualizations and being able to extract insights very quickly because you're using your brain for what it was really designed for, and that's to basically detect patterns, trends, and outliers. So we're really trying to tap into those key capabilities and expose more visual analytic services in that regard. Storytelling is kind of the other side of the same coin. We've got the analysis and exploration. The other side is the storytelling. So once you've identified those insights and want to communicate those to a broader organization, you're then into the realm of storytelling. So we're trying to provide richer tools in which to give you the ability to tell your story, to tell your insights about that data set. PowerMap illustrates some of those examples, like generating these tours where you can illustrate the path that you may have taken with the data or their exploration. But we'll be exposing those types of capabilities in other aspects of our product. Big data is another one. It's all over, and the definition of big data continues to change. It used to be kind of stuff that would just fit in memory. Now it's stuff that will just fit on disk, and then tomorrow it could be even bigger than that. As I mentioned earlier, we've rebuilt the charting engine, and that wasn't just because we thought it was an interesting exercise. We had to rebuild it because we had to enable these more modern scenarios. Our new engine is highly performant, highly interactive, and scales across all these different endpoints. So that is kind of the future path we're going, and we'll be able to address many of these scenarios with this new charting engine. And then machine learning is another thing that's kind of on the rise now, being able to look at the heuristics and learn from how people use the product to more effectively surface visualizations and to suggest things that will be of value to them. So lots of things happening in the industry. We're taking very close note of those. As far as our visualization roadmap goes, you'll see a much more regular cadence of releases coming from this. A good example of that is with Office 365. Every month we're coming out with new features, new capabilities that are things that I know most of you really want. So you'll see more and more of that as we move forward. We've re-architected our infrastructure for larger data sets and richer activity. That was one of the big motivations for rewriting our charting engine. Some of the add-ins that we have today, like Power View, Power Map, those are great in their own sense, but they're a bit siloed. They can't really interact with the core capabilities of the application. So we're going to be migrating a lot of the key pieces of those add-ins as native functionality as we move forward. And then the last point here is just a much greater focus on visual analytics. As I showed you in the history, we have been investing in this space, and some releases more so than others. This is a time where visual analytics is really coming into its own, and we're taking note of that and investing in it heavily. So just kind of wrap things up, the visual capabilities, the visual analytics that I showed you fits into the bigger, broader picture of our entire BI stack. There's many different steps along the user journey that people take to achieve their end goals. The visualization side of it is the middle piece that we talked about today, but there's many components to this. Hopefully you're able to attend the other sessions that took place this week that covered the other steps along this journey. If you weren't, you can always watch it on Channel 9 as a repeat. But there's some great material to take advantage of in that regard. If you're interested in more information about this, we have the technical preview, as I mentioned earlier. Get signed up for that. We have a number of forums with Facebook and then the online community. All this material will be available to you for access. A number of sessions have already taken place throughout the week, but there's a few more on later this afternoon and Thursday, in case you're interested in those. Check them out. And let's see. Any more questions? Yes?
I saw where you indicated there's a slicer performance improvement.
Mm-hmm.
But are there any substitutes for the slicers, like even the regular drop-down?
Sure.
Similar features, not to show all the values, only the values that are relevant.
Sure. The question is, are there any slicer improvements planned for the future? Is that a fair characterization?
No. Are there any other substitutes for slicers instead of slicers? So can we use the drop-down?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, yes, different ways of representing a slicer, certainly. So we have a whole series of plans around slicers. We see those as a key capability of doing visual analytics and things of that nature. Today, we just have the big buttons. There's many different ways to surface that through sliders, drop-downs, radio buttons, you name it. Those are all in the works. We haven't figured out exactly what the complete roadmap looks like, but that's all fair game for what we're looking at in the future. Okay?
That's not going to be part of your
Not right now. No, sorry. Okay, another question. Sure.
So he already asked the question about the SharePoint and interactivity with 2016. Is there going to be capabilities, maybe some drill-in capabilities, providing a way to reference other data and visualize that as part of the charting control?
Yeah, so your mic wasn't working, I'll just repeat your question. Is there going to be any capability around drilling into the data on SharePoint to surface the underlying information? That's a key scenario. Again, that's one that it's on our roadmap. It's not going to be available in this first release, but it'll be coming out in a subsequent one at some point in the future.
Like as an update to 2016, or are you saying like a later version of Office than 2016?
It's, we don't know exactly how we're going to be messaging future releases after 2016. O365, the good news there, it's a subscription, so you just get the continuous goodness as things roll off the assembly line. I don't know if there's going to be like an Office 2018 or 2017 or things of that nature, but It is in the roadmap. We understand the importance of it. It's very important from a BI perspective to be able to do those drilling type operations.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Sure. I'm sorry? Oh, sure thing. There you go. We're here. Yeah, so kind of a combo chart of tree map and heat map just to see where the concentration is. That's a really interesting idea. We are literally knee-deep in our planning right now for the next release because we're trying to wrap this current product up and push the other one out the door. I love the feedback. I will say that heat map, that aspect of it is near, it's in the top part of our list, but we haven't necessarily locked down exactly what the features are, but it's a great idea. Sure.
Just as far as how the development is going, how does the work being done in Office 2016 blend into like PowerView and even some of like the SSRS? Is it two completely different teams? Will we see some parity?
Sure. No, that's a great question. It's basically how do the products of PowerView, SSRS work into the grander scheme of Office and things of that nature? It's kind of a complicated landscape of functionality right now. I'll give you a brief answer. We can talk a little bit more offline because it's one of these things where it's not a quick type of thing. PowerView, there's a couple different versions of PowerView right now. There's PowerView, the add-in that sits within Excel. And that falls into the domain of other add-ins where we're trying to look at the key functionality there and migrate that in as native features. So in the future, you'll see PowerView-like capability starting to light up in the native Excel app. Okay? Then there's PowerView in the cloud. It's part of Power BI that is separate from what I just talked about. And we're working with the other teams that are driving that effort to ensure that we have got good synergy and good collaboration. As far as SSRS goes, that again is a separate product, but one of the things we're trying to do is provide a more holistic experience with our visualizations across Microsoft. We call this OneViz, so that if there's a feature in one product, you can still leverage it in another product. We're not quite there yet, but it's the vision that we're trying to strive for. But we can talk more offline. Other questions? Yes?
So in 2016, if we have charts that we built in 2013 products, will they work, after the upgrade, or will we
Sure.
have to do some type of
Yeah,
migration?
great question. So the question is basically, I've got charts in 2013, I upgrade to 2016, what happens to my charts? The good news is they will work exactly the way they did in 2013. The reason for that is because, as I was saying before, we have a new charting engine, but effectively in the 2016 release, we'll have a side-by-side model. We'll have the old engine running. We'll have the new engine running right alongside of it, so there won't be any problem from a compatibility standpoint. The experiences will be very similar because it's just UI that sits on top of these two engines. But effectively, it's two different things doing the layout and the calculations of the charts. So all of your column charts and line charts will work exactly the way they did in 2013 and 2016. Beyond 2016, we're going to be putting extra effort on migrating the legacy charts into the new charting engine so that you'll be able to take advantage of all the new richness that will be lighting up with these new visualizations. Okay? Other questions? All right, I want to thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Oh, sorry.
Next slide.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I get all the sessions.
Sure. All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.